you're joining us, welcome to this module on collaboration, student analytics, communication, and feedback in virtual classroom. So we'll try to, for the interest of time, we'll try to do as much. But in case we are not managing to cover everything today, don't worry. We'll still have a second go on it in the next webinar. That should be next week on Monday. So starting us off, when you talk about collaboration, basically you need to know that virtual classroom lessons should be more about learners working together collaboratively, and not the lecture or the PowerPoint method that most of us are used to. So collaboration generally helps learners to build mental models through practice and application. Mental models are the scaffolding of our internal learning architecture, and they help us to take what we learn in a classroom and apply it in a real life time of our work. So as you plan about collaboration, the main purpose of it in a virtual classroom is to ensure that learners achieve the desired levels of content mastery while working with other participants, for instance. It also is exemplified by the practice of new skills and application of knowledge by the learners. How do you achieve collaboration in a classroom, for instance? In a virtual setting, we can achieve collaboration by using quite a number of activities or things. For example, we could work with what you call breakout rooms. We could use shared whiteboards, virtual whiteboards that is. We could also use facilitated discussions, all this while as we move up the Bloom's taxonomy ladder. I hope you remember that from our previous modules. So generally, collaboration can best be achieved with small groups, ideally 10 to 15 students per group, and this supplemented by participant materials to support the learning process. It helps the learners to build mental models, as I've already talked about in the initial slide, and therefore we can combine a number of facilitator skills in a virtual classroom using tools. So to foster collaboration in the virtual classroom, a good facilitator should know how to probably manage the virtual classroom technology skillfully. An educator should also foster concurrent collaboration and avoid consecutive collaboration. In this case, concurrent collaboration allows all learners the opportunity to interact at once or simultaneously, whereas consecutive collaboration allows learners to interact one at a time, that is serially. The reason as to why concurrent collaboration is ideal when you're talking about collaboration in a virtual classroom, it saves time. For example, maybe if you are doing an introduction bit of the classroom and you want the learners to know each other, if you are to go each learner saying his or her name one at a time, you'll realize that you'll take about 6 to 10 minutes on introduction alone. And remember, we want to make a lesson as engaging as possible. So some students might say their name and then start drifting and doing other things as they wait others to say their name. So to avoid such kind of collaboration, we are saying you embrace concurrent collaboration in the sense that learners can just maybe use chats to say their name. The way we always ask you guys to kindly briefly introduce yourself on the chat section and all that. That saves time when it comes to interactivity. We shall be looking at tools for collaboration later on in this module. So in every classroom, for example, the first way you can invoke or bring about collaboration is through discussions. Yeah. Discussions in every classroom, we will always have students who are very quick to raise their hand in a face-to-face classroom. they're always up about they want to contribute or participate in one way or another. But there are also those students who are hesitant to engage. So the challenges of getting students to participate have intensified in this new normal. For example, in remote learning, it is very difficult to pinpoint students or to bring out students so that they can participate in a discussion. So we are seeing a situation where the digital platforms have created an added communication barrier by making it hard to know when to talk, for example, and also maybe how to read subtle but important elements of a conversation. For example, it's very difficult to read a person's or a learner's body language and or facial expression. So online discussions are often hindered by a variability in students' access to technology. That's an addition to the barriers that we have. The digital divide, remember, that has been brought about by lack of access to technology, the knowledge digital divide where students don't know how to use the technology itself. And also, this has been greatly hindered by privacy concerns. And consequently, many of us, by us, I mean teachers, we have had to rely on students submitting work over isolated channels like emails, and this can leave a back and forth students and teachers. So educators can discussions, their grasp of their materials, exchanging ideas, debating topics, and asking questions. Educators can also facilitate the discussion by moderating, evaluating, and even grading students' discussions. There is no one size fits all approach to when an educator or when you should use online discussions and how often you should use them and how much they should interact with the discussions. So you should evaluate your students' needs on a case-by-case basis. For example, how often should you reply in an online discussion forum can vary based on a number of factors, such as the level of the students. With regard to this, new students and or beginners may require more interaction than high level or senior students who may prefer to lead the discussion themselves and to learn from each other as much as from the teacher. The other thing that could also define how you interact as an educator in the discussion forum probably would be the topic. Some topics might require more management and guidance by the teacher than others. For example, you might have a topic that in the view of the educator, it's a bit technical, so you cannot just let the students go and work on it or discuss it on their own. You might need to be there to give them the technical guidance and advice that they might require during their discussion. You might also want to consider the discussion type. Yeah, you learn of different kinds of discussions that can be utilized, and different ones would require different levels of interaction by the teacher. So as you do your discussion, what is your role as an educator in the virtual discussions? So an educator has quite a number of roles that he can assume: regulating, inviting, summarizing, assessing, or counseling. So the educator presence is very key to student satisfaction. On the other hand, too much interaction and posting by the educator in discussions can lead to reduced posting by the students. Remember, students claim higher satisfaction in courses that have higher instructor presence and availability, but also because the instructor is considered to be an authoritarian figure, right? It has been found that the sooner and the more often an instructor posts in discussion forums, the less frequent and the shorter the posts by students are. Why? Because it's like you become a one-man show. You are now changing the modern approach of inclusivity or learner-centered to a more traditional approach, teacher-centered, because if you'll be the one posting all the time and all that, learners always take a backseat. A good educator will always facilitate the discussion, not to take a backseat as per se, but to guide the learners through the discussion as they share their opinions and all that. So students require some time to start and feel confident in expressing their views with each other before the instructor maybe begins to interact with them. Otherwise, they'll just reply to the instructor and not to each other. So what is your role as an educator? You can play the role of regulating the discussion. In this case, you can help regulate students' interaction by creating and implementing clear rules and policies that are related to the discussion, board posts, and replies. This might include quantitative rules about how often to post, by when, and to whom. It also includes qualitative rules about the content and the quality of the posts and the replies. You can also play the role of inviting. In this case, you make it clear to the students how to contact them for help or guidance and or questions and on how to support on the discussion topics. This can be a separate online forum for building discussions between the instructor and students, which is always from the course topic discussions in which the instructor hopes the students will teach each other. We always call this a virtual office. You can also summarize the discussion. Yeah. As an instructor, you play an integral part in summarizing the student discussion and going over main points and important conclusions. Putting in direct examples from the discussion is very useful and gives credit to high quality interactions. This helps the students in summarizing their own learning, as well as lets them know clearly that they were being monitored throughout the process. You can also assess. Remember, we talked about types of learning models, formative and summative. Assessing can also take the role of formative assessment and feedback. They help students to improve their performance during the course. Offering feedback, as we shall look later on in this presentation, on the quality of posts with examples of expectations, helps students to meet your expectations as an educator and to improve on the quality of their interactions within their peers. And then finally, you can also assume the role of counseling. Yeah, you should let the students know they are there to be supported by you, and be in frequent contact with the students through means other than just the discussion forums. They can send out updates by email maybe, and give students and provide students many ways to contact them, probably through maybe even WhatsApp, or maybe through a special instructor student virtual office discussion forum. So these are the 5 roles that you can assume as an educator when you are conducting your discussions to bring about collaboration within your virtual classroom. So out of these 5, I briefly review which one do you think would be hardest to implement in your class and why? Yeah, which do you feel will be most essential? Use the chat section to respond to that. Looking at the 5 roles as of an educator in a virtual discussion, which one would you be comfortable with, and which one do you think is difficult to implement? Kindly use the chat section to feed in your responses. So discussions, generally, we should use voices of learners in class by calling on them and asking them for their ideas and opinions. And how can we achieve this? We can achieve this maybe through class questions in open forums. We can use real life examples. In this case, teachers and students can demonstrate class concepts by contributing real life scenarios. You can do a virtual debate, right? You can use open-ended questions, and you can also do what we call brainstorming. So in the discussions, the teacher creates a forum for open questions and commentary, and include class content processes, questions, and embedded digital content. Students see the teacher response to their to their classmates' questions, and they can therefore jump in or contribute to the teacher's response towards their classmates, and that brings about just collaboration to enhance learning for the entire class. How then do you manage an online discussion? There are quite a number of ways you can use to manage online discussions to avoid work overload or too much work on the educator's part. Remember, if you're dealing with a big group, you can have so many posts, you can have so many chats. How then do you manage that to avoid that burnout or to avoid that work overload? One, the first principle is save, save, save. For example, if you write up a thoughtful and well-supported reference reply on a given topic or a given student, chances are you might use it again. And the next time you teach that same topic or course to other students. So it's always important. You can save it in a file to be reused. Save anything you might reuse and save yourself time in the future. Secondly, you could choose to reply to multiple students at the same time. Do not reply to each student with the same information or web link. Instead, try to get them onto the same thread and reply to them all in that thread. If you wait for a day or two, it's also important you could reply to a thread between 2 to 4 students, because you might want one student responding today, the other student will respond tomorrow, and another maybe the day after, and they are responding on the same thing. So if you could just buy some time before you can reply to the students, then you'll realize that replying in multiple students saves you a lot of time. You can also set working hours. Yeah, online discussions are always there. It can invade the rest of your life until you find you are logging into the course far too often. So it's always important to set specific hours when you will log in into your online course and check the discussions, and sticks to that schedule so that you build a routine where the learners know my educator or my teacher answers to my chat sessions or chat questions at this particular time of the day. You need to set specific hours when you will log in, as I've said, and try not to log in outside those set hours to avoid what I've already talked about, burnout. You also need to evaluate quality versus quantity. Yeah, replying to all students in the course with fluff and low quality replies is far less advantageous to their learning than making a few directed or specific and high quality replies. Make it clear to the students that a reply to one student is always open to discussion by the entire class. So don't customize the replies. Let them be open. Let them be accessed by others. Let them even others contribute to the reply that you've given to a student X. Let it not be customized to that student. And then finally, another tip, you could pick your battles carefully. Don't spend hours writing up thoughtful, in-depth tutorials or posts or help guide unless you can reuse it with other students in the future. Try to find the same thing online already written and give the students that link instead. So instead of duplicating what's already online into maybe your slides or into your chatting space, you could just put their link for the students to go and read what you wanted to communicate. Don't spend hours on thoughtful feedback for a student's post where the student very clearly did not even spend even 3 minutes writing it. So how would you spend 10 minutes to respond to a student reply that he only used maybe 1 minute? These are the tips that will help you as an educator to avoid a work overload, or basically what we call burnout. The next way we can enhance collaboration in classroom is through what we call synchronous learning. Real-time collaboration is enhanced by what we call flipped classroom. This is something that has been up there guys have talked about flipping and flipped classroom and all that. But do you ever ask ourselves, what is a flipped classroom? A flipped classroom is basically an instructional strategy and a type of blended learning focused on student engagement and active learning, giving you, the teacher or the educator, a better opportunity to deal with mixed levels, student difficulties, and differentiated learning preferences during in-class time. Flipped classrooms allow teachers to completely personalize instruction based on students' ability and their progress towards the learning objectives. So from the skill plan objective, how can we personalize learning path for each specific student? To understand this, let us look at what we call the 4 pillars of flip learning model. The flip learning model has 4 pillars. The F in the flip stands for flexible environment. This allows for a variety of learning models, a variety of learning modes. Educators can rearrange their learning spaces to accommodate a lesson or a unit to support either group work or independent study. Educators should enhance flexibility in a flipped classroom model by establishing spaces and timeframes that permit students to interact and reflect on their learning as needed. They can also continuously observe and monitor students to make adjustment as appropriate. And finally, you as an educator, you can enhance a flexible environment by providing students with different ways to learn content and demonstrate their mastery. The second pillar in the flipped classroom model is the learning culture. The L in the flip stands for the learning culture. We know that in the traditional approach, the teacher is the center of knowledge. On the contrary, in flip learning model, this shifts instructions to learner-centered approach, where in class time is dedicated to exploring topics in greater depth and creating rich learning opportunities. Students are therefore involved in knowledge construction as they participate in and evaluate their learning in a manner that is personally meaningful. As an educator, you can entrench a learning culture by giving students opportunities to engage in meaningful activities without the teacher being central, by also doing what you call scaffolding activities and making them accessible to all learners through and feedback. The other pillar in the flip classroom model is intentional content. The I in the flip stands for intentional content. So flipped learning educators continuously think of how to help learners develop conceptual understanding as well as procedural fluency. They determine what they need to teach and what materials learners should explore on their own. You can enhance intentional content by creating relevant content, such as maybe videos for the students. You can do differentiating to make content available, accessible, and relevant to all learners, and also prioritize concepts used in direct instruction for learners to access on their own. And finally, the fourth pillar in the flip is professional educator. The role of a professional educator in a flipped classroom is to provide learners with feedback relevant in the moment, and assessing work. Professional educators are reflective in their work. They connect with others to improve their instructions. They accept constructive criticism and tolerate controlled chaos in their classroom. You should, as a professional educator, be able to be available to all students for individual or small group and provide class feedback in real time as needed. You should also conduct ongoing formative assessments during class time through observations and by recording data to inform future instructions. You can also be able to achieve this by collaborating and reflecting with other educators and take responsibility for transforming your practice. So how then do we look at the flipped classroom model? A flipped classroom model, sorry for that, a flipped classroom model is one that inverts the typical cycle of content acquisition and application, as you can see on that diagram in your slide. Students gain necessary knowledge before the class. In this case, students get used to new lesson concepts, they take quizzes, jot down questions for further discussions. And in addition, teachers receive real-time data on students' performance progress. Instructors guide students to actively and interactively clarify and apply that knowledge during class. Students can explore new concepts in class and through digital learning activities, peer discussions, and one-on-one sessions with the teacher. So the teachers will deliver a personalized instruction during the classroom. And after class, students will review and reflect on their understanding of the concept and lesson material. They can also provide an opportunity for parents to track students' progress and contribute to constructive feedback. This approach supports instructors playing their most important role of guiding the students to deeper thinking and higher levels of application. A flipped class keeps student learning at the center of teaching. And therefore, if you map a flipped classroom model to the Bloom's taxonomy, the cognitive skill level that we looked at in our previous modules, you'll understand that in this kind of model, the flipped classroom model, the students gain necessary knowledge before class. And you'll realize that this will enhance attainment of the lower level of the Bloom's taxonomy, that's remembrance and understanding, before even the student come to class. Remember, in traditional learning, lower levels of learning such as remembering and understanding happens in classroom, while students are usually left to work on activities that involve higher level of learning outside of classroom. However, in this flipped classroom model, learning is flipped in the sense that, see from the pyramid, students can finish the lower levels of cognitive work before the class. And when they come to class, they can just engage in higher cognitive levels of learning with peers and the teacher presence. So why do a flip classroom as an educator? The concept of flipped classroom was first brought up by Jonathan Bergman and others, who are both high school chemistry teachers. In their book, they explored a couple of reasons why you should consider flipping. Flipping your classroom has many benefits. Yeah. This book on flipped classroom by Jonathan Bergman is called Flip Your Classroom, Reach Every Student in Every Class Every Day. This was authored in 2012. So what are the benefits of a flipped classroom as explored by these great scientists? One, students learn more deeply in a flipped classroom model. So as a result of students taking responsibility, interacting meaningfully, and often with their instructor and peers, and getting and giving frequent feedback, students acquire a deep understanding of the content and how to use it. Students are more active participants in a flipped learning, in the sense that since the student role shifts from passive recipient to active constructor of knowledge, this gives them opportunities to practice using the intellectual tools of discipline. The other benefit is that a flipped classroom, because of the interaction, it increases the students' learning from one another. It increases the student interaction, since students work together applying course concepts with guidance from the instructor, and this increases interaction to help create a learning community that encourages them to build knowledge together inside and outside the classroom. The other benefit is that a flipped classroom provides an environment where the instructor and the student get more feedback, with more opportunities for students to apply their knowledge and therefore demonstrate their ability to use it in their gaps, understanding becoming visible to both themselves and the instructor. So other ways that we can use to foster collaboration, other than flipped classroom and discussion, facilitated discussion, we have what we call breakout rooms. Breakout rooms allow groups or two or more participants to meet and collaborate during a larger live online session. For example, in such a live session, I would generate breakout rooms where I'll group quite a number of you in different groups to go and discuss on different topics. They can be used to create interaction and collaboration by making your content more learner-centered. It's important for you to include this feature in your virtual classrooms when you are doing your instructional design. And this will ensure that participants will not only meet and collaborate with other participants, but they will also be more engaged. However, this tool is slightly different from chats. We shall also be looking at chats later on. In these breakout rooms, participants can talk. Usually, their personal audio feed follows them into the small group work area, and they can collaborate using tools like whiteboards. Chats in them can also be used, and application sharing. So breakout rooms are more extensive or versatile than chat rooms. This is really just but a more personal classroom in which students are allowed to work collaboratively. Different groups can work with different content or on different exercises from one breakout room to the next. The facilitator can also move from one breakout room to another so as to monitor or rather help the participants in one way or another. More often, participants won't have a facilitator in a breakout room. That means instructions for breakout rooms must be very clear. So instructions should be both in participants' guides and copied into the chat area before sending participants to their respective breakout room activities. If you could have more than one expert at your presentation or learning event, you can assign each expert to each breakout room, and participants can go to the room of their choice for discussion. The other way to enhance collaboration, again, is using shared whiteboard. You can use the whiteboard for all kinds of activities. This is virtual whiteboards, remember? This includes sharing slides and documents as if they were flip charts in a traditional setting, or to record participants' comments to emphasize an important point, and also to write exercise instructions. For example, you can have participants all write their best opening line for a story on the whiteboard. Afterwards, have all participants maybe put a star next to their favorite opener. Yeah. And the other way also we can enhance collaboration is by using public chats. Public and private chats, we can still look at them together. A chat is one of the easiest ways to encourage interaction in a virtual classroom. Yeah. Text-based chats allow facilitators and learners to communicate with one another using text messaging. You could also use private chat sessions where now this is a message that is channeled to one particular participant in the chat. As an educator, you need to understand chat capabilities in order to include it in your instructional design. For example, chats can be applied in brainstorming. You could also use chats in responding or reacting to content. And you can also use chats in instructions for self-paced activities. So with those different types of ways of engaging learners to enhance collaboration, look at one that suits you and one that you will prefer to use in your classroom. But if you have a blended way of using all these ways of enhancing collaboration in your classroom, it will bring out better results and therefore promote an interdisciplinary approach when it comes to learning. We are also going to look at another concept under this pillar 4, what we call student progress analytics. That was collaboration. Remember, as I was starting, we said we'll be looking at collaboration, student progress analytics, and then we shall look at communication and feedback. So implementing data-driven classroom, it's important for us to have rich analytics and data visualization that provide real-time insights to inform instructions. This can be achieved through tracking results instantly to know each student's learning progress. You can compare and analyze the data and see where to improve your instructions. And you can also do formative assessments that can also highlight students' needs in real time, and thus which can then be addressed through professional teacher development. In data-driven classrooms, knowing what to look for is critical in order to close students' learning gaps. You need to pay attention to trends so you can identify gaps between instruction and student performance. This will help you to know if the issue lies in the teacher or in yourself as an instructor, or in your instructional practices, or the issue lies in a misunderstanding of the standards on the side of the student. Presently, many schools are mostly capturing the data related to students and teachers' age, admission number, maybe KCP marks, yeah, qualifications, demography, attendance of class, test scores, socioeconomic status, and maybe placement. Schools capture quite a number of students in various tests, scores of students in various tests. They also have records on attendance and in some cases performance of students in maybe extracurricular activities. The attendance data and the test scores are analyzed to find out the level of interest in schooling for a specific student. If the student is losing, for example, interest, it will be exhibited or manifested in the attendance and in the grades. So if you're a physics teacher, probably teaching students at Form 2 third term, then you realize student X grades have started going down. We know that most of the high schools will choose subjects in second term or third term of Form 2. So some students will just give up, and sometimes they'll Skype your classes. So you can clearly get a decline in scores of this learner, and you can quickly relate it to class attendance and see, okay, probably the reason why this learner is not getting a good grade this time is maybe he has not been attending my classes, or maybe he has just given up knowing that he'll not be choosing physics after all at the end of this year. It is important to have data-driven instructions. So when teachers use data to drive their decisions and plans, they are able to respond to problems more effectively, construct new teaching methods, and advance skill sets faster. In a data-driven classroom, collecting and analyzing students' work are part of how schools report and track performance. In simple terms, data-driven instruction is using information gathered from learning results to determine what comes next in your instructions as an educator. So within a classroom, data comes in two forms. We have formative and summative. What is formative data? If you could relate this to formative and summative assessment. Formative data is the information that you gather as you continue teaching and or as teaching and learning takes place. Whereas summative data is what you gather or what you get from the students at the end of a learning period, or typically at the end of a unit of study or a predetermined period of time, for example, end of term. An effective educator like you and me will collect both forms of data and analyze it to look for patterns of success and needs. When teachers use data to drive their decisions and plans, as I've already said earlier, they are able to respond to problems more effectively, construct new teaching methods, and advance skill sets faster. Sometimes data collection analysis can be very overwhelming. Those who have tried collecting and analyzing data for their class, it can be very overwhelming and time consuming. But it's a very critical for meeting the learning needs of students. So if data-driven instruction is new to you, if you've not used to doing it, it's advisable to start small. So here are some of the steps that you can take to ease yourself or to lower the baggage or to lower the burden of data collection and analysis in trying to come up with data-driven instruction. One, as I've already alluded to earlier, you need to start small and then scale your efforts with progress. For example, begin with one subject. If you are a physics teacher and chemistry teacher, you can start with physics, for example. Then you find methods that work very well. Then you cascade and apply them methodically to all your subjects and or classes. You might be having 4 classes, for example. So you can start small by analyzing physics in Form 1N. Once you have understood the process of collecting data and analyzing, you can now move to physics Form 2 South. And later on, chemistry Form 4Q. You can also decide what skill and knowledge you want students to know and understand. Then determine the data you will collect and how you will collect it. Narrow down your focus then on the key concepts that and or skills that you want your students to gain. Then do an analysis of your efforts and reflect on whether the steps you have taken have made an impression. Always engage your students by involving them in target setting or setting goals. You can also encourage them to reflect upon their progress. Then use graphs. Infographics will always track progress very well. For example, charts, pie charts, bar graphs, and all that. This helps the student at a glance and also parents to visualize their achievements and results. Other than telling parents in a parents meeting that Form 4As had 20 As, they had a mean drop of negative 2.0 in mathematics. Why can't you use infographics? Infographics are things like pie charts or bar graphs. At a glance, somebody does not need rocket science to understand what the progress report looks like. And then finally, you need to be open about communicating with others about the class-wide results. You can do this by relaying information about outcomes and explaining how instructions will be modified based on new data. Remember, I've already talked about collaboration. Collaboration does not only mean for the student. Collaboration also works very well for teachers. So as a professional educator, share information you have analyzed in your class with maybe another subject teacher in the same class. He might get it, find it useful to try and improve his instructional design in maybe English. So let us collaborate as teachers, invite other teachers in your classroom, let them give you feedback. Remember, as a professional educator, we've said, you must be ready to accept constructive criticism in order to improve your instructional design strategy. Communication is our last part of this pillar. Providing effective communication and feedback to students and parents ensures that students' needs are provided with frequent feedback on their learning progress so as to help them improve in their daily learning and or termly goals. Parents also need to track their students' progress and contribute constructive feedback. So feedback in a virtual classroom probably can be defined as information allowing a learner to reduce the gap between what is evident currently and what could or what should be the case. So you are trying to reduce the gap on the ideal situation and the real situation. Feedback can serve a number of purposes and take a number of forms. Feedback can be provided as a single entity, i.e. informal feedback on a student's grasp of concept in class, or a combination of multiple entities. We call it formal or formative or peer feedback on a stage one of an assessment task. Yeah, each of these types of formal assessments and feedbacks has its place in enhancing and maximizing students' learning. Thus, where possible, courses should provide opportunities for a range of feedback types. And that takes us to the types of feedback that we can be able to expose our learners to. There are quite a number of types of feedback. Informal feedback and formal feedback, I've briefly touched on them in the previous slide. Formative feedback, summative feedback, student peer feedback, and student self feedback. And finally, we shall look at constructive feedback. Remember, it is your duty to facilitate learning. But in so doing, use feedback to improve your instruction strategy. So what is informal feedback? Informal feedback can occur at any time, as it is something that emerges spontaneously in the moment of or during the class time. Therefore, informal feedback requires the building of a rapport with students to effectively encourage, coach, or guide them in daily management and decision making for learning. This might occur in a classroom, over the phone, in an online forum, or even in a virtual classroom. So this is the feedback that you give students just informally. Good work, keep it up. You answered that question well, Mary. So such kind of feedback, it always motivates the learner, by the way. Good, keep it up. That's what we always use in our classroom. Clap for Jen. Formal feedback, on the other hand, is a planned and systematic scheduled into the process, usually associated with assessment tasks. Formal feedback could include the likes of marking criteria, competences or achievements of standards, and is recorded for both the student and the organization as evidence. So you've given an end of term exam, reports have been generated of the term. You as the teacher, have you met your goals? And as an institution, have we met the goals that we set in the opening staff meeting? You now use this type of feedback to evaluate not only the learners, but the organizational policy when it comes to education and curriculum. Then we have what we call the formative feedback. The goal of formative assessment is to monitor student learning so as to provide ongoing feedback that can be used by instructors or teachers to improve their teaching and by students to improve their learning. And therefore, formative feedback is best given early in the course and prior to the summative assessment. So formative feedback helps students to improve and prevent them from making the same mistakes again and again. In some cases, feedback is required before students can progress or feel capable of progressing to the next stage of the assessment. Then we talk about summative feedback. With regard to summative feedback, its goal is to evaluate students' learning at the end of an instructional unit or an instructional period against some set standards or benchmarks. For example, how did the girls in 4 North perform compared to the boys in the same class? Yeah, when they sat for their pre-mock exam. So therefore, summative feedback consists of detailed comments that are related to specific aspects of their work. It could be gender performance, it could be subject performance, it could be those who managed to meet their targets that they had set at the beginning of the term. So it clearly explains how the mark was derived from the criteria that was provided, and additional constructive comments on how the work could be improved. And then we have what we call student peer feedback, very important. Teachers are no longer the only ones who are supposed to give feedback to students. Yeah, they are not the experts at giving feedback. We talk of peer reviews, lesson peer reviews, where probably as a teacher you facilitate students maybe to review other students. Maybe you had given an assignment on a presentation task. So let the students evaluate their other students. Let them give constructive feedback within the lesson or within the course. So with basic instructions and an ongoing support, students can learn to give quality feedback, which is highly valued by their friends or peers. Providing students with regular opportunities to give and receive peer feedback enriches their learning experience and develops their professional skill set. Students will always want to be praised. They always want to appear to be heroes. So give them that opportunity to feel sweet when they have done their work very well in classroom. Let the other students say, oh yeah, you've done well. Don't always be there to jump in, yes, Kamau, you did well. And you don't give an opportunity for other students to also say something about how Kamau maybe presented the task. Student self-feedback. Other than student peer feedback, the student also needs to reevaluate himself. How did I perform? Yeah. This is the ultimate goal of feedback for learning. Even before you tell the other students to evaluate this learner, give the student an opportunity to say, how do you think you performed? Are there some areas you think you need improvement? Yeah. So during the provision of feedback, the teacher has the opportunity not only to provide direction for the students, but to teach them through explicit modeling and instruction the skills of self-assessment and goal setting. This leads students to becoming more independent and believing in themselves and knowing that mistakes are bound to happen, but I can correct them when I get the second shot on the task. So to help students reach autonomy, teachers and or educators can explicitly identify, share, and clarify. So we are saying an educator can, to help them reach this level of autonomy on student self-feedback, you can explicitly identify, share, and clarify learning goals and success criteria. Model the application of criteria using samples, provide guided opportunities for self-feedback, teach the students how to use the feedback to determine next steps and set goals, and also allow time for self-feedback and reflection. Remember in our previous modules, we looked at things like assessment rubrics. This is where they come in handy. In any flipped classroom, for example, when you've given student tasks to accomplish on their own as you guide them, also be able to provide rubrics sheets to each groups or to each student so that they can assess what other students are doing based on the learning outcomes that you had set out in that lesson. make it a norm for students to evaluate each other based on the laid down criteria or descriptors that you had come up with in that rubric. And then we have what we call constructive feedback. Constructive feedback here, it's a type of feedback that is specific, issue focused, and based on observations. This brings us to 4 types of constructive feedback. We have what we call negative feedback, which includes corrective comments about the past behavior, and it focuses on behavior that was not successful and should not be repeated. Then we have positive feedback. This is reaffirming or affirming comments about the past behavior. It focuses on behavior that was successful and good and should be continued. And then we have negative feed forward. Get the difference. Negative feed forward includes corrective comments about future performance. It focuses on behavior that should be avoided in future. And then we have positive feed forward. This is affirming comments about future behavior, focused on behavior that will improve performance in the future. So this and what we have looked at under collaboration and analytics, when we blend all these that we have looked at today, you become an exemplary teacher or a digital teacher of distinction. But as I sum up, I'll tell you this. Technology can never replace a good teacher. But a good technology in the hands of a good teacher is transformational. That is a quote by George Couros. Thank you very much. I think I'm in time, and that is what I had for you today on the 3 aspects of collaboration in classroom, student progress analytics, and providing feedback or communication. Thank you very much. Over to you, Kiko. Kiko, if you could hear me.
Thank you so much, Teacher Maxwell. Yeah, I can hear you clearly. Thank you so much for that great presentation. That was really amazing. So